Good evening, everybody.
Kabotachaf, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay. Yeah, looks like we're going to hay. Yeah, okay. So let's get started with that. So says the tour here, Tanur וכיריים חדשים, הרי ככל הכלים הניתנים בחצר, אבל אין סכין אותן בשמן ולא תכין אותן. So says the tour that ovens and stoves, right? So they're not muktzah. That's what he's trying to say, right? There's no din of muktzah with them on Yom Tov, because obviously, right? We can cook on Yom Tov, so there's no reason why these things should be muktzah. But then he says, right, that there's one or two things we cannot do, which is that to anoint them with oil, right, or to coat them, plaster them, right, whatever. So let's see the language of the Torah inside. There's a little bit more here, content that we have to see. Yeah, so it says like this. He continues in the Torah here. "V'lo tachin otan b'matlit." Right, so he says we're not allowed to coat it with matlit. Is like some kind of a rag. "V'lo mefigin otan b'tzonen." And also, we're not allowed to soak them, like, or not soak them, but to pour like cold water on them. כדי לחזק, in order to strengthen it, right? אבל הסק ראשון מותר, but the first lighting of the oven is allowed. ואף על פי שהוא חדש, even though it's new, שאינו נגמר להתחזק עד שיפיגנו, ואם צריך להפיגו כדי להפות בו כגון שהוסק יותר מדי, יכול להפיגו בצונן. ולכן היה אומר, הרב מאיר רוטנברג, therefore this rabbi used to say, שמותר לשתות במים המכבדת שמכבדים בו את התנור, אף על פי שמכבה. Yeah, so you know what I suggest is we should maybe skip this halakha because it's not really relevant to us. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because it's talking about their ovens, right, and stoves, which were made out of clay. So there was all kinds of issues, that they had to deal with that regarding, doing things which strengthen the clay, by using certain types of whether it's heat or cold or water or whatever it is. Doesn't really apply to us today. So I'm just going to skip it over go to the next one. It says like this, right? Mutar lefot tanur melo pat, right? So next one says like this. You're allowed um to bake oven full of bread. Oven full of bread, right? So what does that mean? Like you put the maximum amount of bread in there, that you can put, right? So as we said, in those days, they used to um, they used to stick the bread on the walls of the oven. אף על פי שאינו צריך אלא פת אחד, ופלא שעה שדווקא אליהם, שהתאומים שלהם קטנים, היו מדבקים בפת בדופניהם, בתוך מה שהוא מלא אין מקום לחומו ולהתפשט בפת ונפה יפה. אבל בתאומים שלנו, אין ליפות יותר ממה שצריך אסור לגבל לתואר. Right, so, yeah, this one is also doesn't really apply to us. So I'll just give you a brief, right, description of what he's talking about here. In those days, as we said, right, um, they used to stick the bread on the walls of the oven. So what happened was that, you know, on Yom Tov, right, how many loaves do you need, right? Let's say, I don't know, you need, for argument's sake, right, 4 or 5 loaves, will be enough for you, right, for the whole holiday, whatever. So, you know, but you're allowed to fill up the oven with loaves, even though you don't need all of them, right? So what's the reason for that? So the reason is because it bakes better that way. uh, when the oven is full, so the bread comes out better. So right, he already points it out, the tour, that in our ovens this doesn't apply, because that only applied when they were sticking it on the walls. So I guess I'll skip that too. Let's just skip over the stuff which is not practical. Uh, right. So let me just see in a bit, Yosef, where we are here. Let's get to something more practical. All this stuff here is not practical. So yeah, you know what? Let's go to the next chapter. Let's jump over, get to some practical stuff. Yeah, this is good. This chapter is good. We're going 2 chapters ahead. Okay, so let's go. Let's start with the tour. New chapter. מכשירי אוכל נפש שאי אפשר לעשותן מערב יום טוב דוחין יום טוב, כגון גריפת תנור או בשיפוד או שנשבר חודו ביום טוב, בעניין שאין ראוי לצלות בו מותר לתקנו, אבל אם נתעקם קצת ועדיין ראוי לצלות בו, אסור לתקנו, אפילו אם יכול לתקנו בידו בלא כלי. So, what is he saying over here? This is a very fundamental discussion about Yom Tov, right? So we're talking about machshirei ochel nefesh, right? So what is that? We're talking about things which are not the labors that bring you to consumption of food, but we're talking about preparations for that, right? Which are like the preliminary labors, right? That come before a little bit, right? To prepare that. So there, right? If it was not possible, says the Torah, if it wasn't possible to do those preparations on before Yom Tov, then you were allowed to do it on Yom Tov. So it really hinges on that, right? Was it possible or not? Okay. That's an important thing to know. So he gives you an example of these things, right? Which is like this. Kegon grefat tanur, right? For instance, like raking out the oven, right? So we don't have that today, right? What is he talking about? He's talking about removing the ashes, right? The whatever, right? That remained there from the former baking that you did, or roasting, right? Whatever. Now you need to remove it and clean it out. So you're allowed to do that. Another thing he says, right, gives you another example, which says a shiput shenishbar chodo, right? If you have a skewer and it was broken, the edge of the point, right, of the skewer was broken, you're allowed to fix it. So you cannot use it without that if you don't fix it. מותר לתקנו, אבל אם נתקם קצת, but it says if it got a little bit bent, right, the skewer, עדיין ראוי לצלות בו, you can use it like that. It's usable. אסור לתקנו, so then you're not allowed to fix it. אפילו אם יכול לתקנו בידו בלא כלי, even if you can do it just with your bare hand, right, without any utensil, you're not allowed to do it. So what's the general idea here, right? The idea is that whatever you don't need, you should not do, right? Whatever you really need to do, you can do it. That's the basic idea, As we said, right, what are we talking about here? We're talking about preliminary labors that bring you to ochal nefesh, right, to consumption, like the things we just described. Okay, let's see the Bet Yosef. Good. So says Bet Yosef, where's the source for this? The Perek and Tzadin, right? It's over there in this Perek in Bitzah, Kav Chet Amud Bet. Darash Rav Chazda, Veitem Rav Yosef, right? These rabbis taught אחד סכין שנפגמה ואחד שיפוד שנרצם ואחד גריפת תנור וקיריים ביום טוב באנו למחלוקת, right? So he says regarding these things, so again, right, what are we talking about? Fixing skewers, fixing knives, or right, raking out the oven from the coals, the ashes, whatever. So it's a machloket. It says Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan, right? Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. The Tanya, like we learned in Braita, en ben Yom Tov leShabbat ela ochel nefesh bilvad. So it says right in the Braita that the only difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov is ochel nefesh, right? Consumption, things for consumption. Rabbi Yehuda matir af ben shirev ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda says you can also do preliminary things, right? As we said, that's our discussion, right? What's the reason of the first opinion? Because the pasuk says, the verse says in Shemot, hu levado yaseh lachem. Only that you can do, right? Whatever is consumption related. All right. Who below machshirav. So what does that mean? You can do that, but not the preliminaries. That's how they right deduce from the verse here, this halacha. ורבי יהודה כתיב, הוא וכתיב לכם, לכל צורככם, ולא קשיא. So Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that, right? He learns the verse a little bit differently. So, כאן במכשירים שאפשר לעשותם מערב יום טוב, כאן במכשירים שאי אפשר לעשותם מערב טוב. So Gemara says, right, that there's really no machloket here. So what does that mean? One is talking about things that you could have done, the preliminary things, right? That you could have done before Yom Tov. So you shouldn't do them on Yom Tov. And one is talking about things that you were not able to do before Yom Tov. So those you can do. That's the way the Talmud qualifies this. Rashi explains, אחד סכין שנפגמה ואחד שיפוד שנרצם. ביום טוב, right? איש פה interior בלעז שנשבר ראשו, right? So he says, what happened over here? That we have like as we said, like a skewer, right? Or a knife that the tip was broken. So it needs a little bit fixing there, right? Whatever, right? So that's like, you're making a kli, right? You're making a utensil by fixing it. Nevertheless, since it's a preliminary thing for ochel nefesh, so right, if you were not able to do it beforehand, you're allowed to do it on Yom Tov. That's what we're saying. Okay. ואחד קליפת תנור, שנפל מן הטיח לתוכו ולא היה יודע במאוד יום, right? So, regarding raking out the oven, explains Rashi, right? How could it be that you weren't able to do this before Yom Tov? What, you can't rake out the oven before? So he explains, right? What are we talking about? That you didn't know that it was there, right? Whatever, So you didn't know that the oven was dirty, right? It was full of ashes, whatever. So you didn't know to do this before. So therefore, we allow you to do it on Yom Tov itself, since you didn't know. באנו למחלוקת רבי יהודה ורבנן, אשר מחלוקתן אנו יכולים ללמוד שאף אלו מכשירים אוכל נפש ופסק רב חסדא הלכה כרבי יהודה. So, right, it says רב חסדא paskins like רבי יהודה, ואף על פי שרב חסדא הזכיר בדבריו הסכין שנפגמה הוא מכלל הדברים שלומדים מחלוקת רבי יהודה ורבנן, לא הזכירו רבנו פה לפי שיש בו חילוקים כמו שיבאר בסמוך. So he says, right, that one interesting thing he mentions that here, that the Tur here didn't mention the issue of the knife, right? He only mentioned the issue of the skewer, but then the Talmud also mentions the knife there. So, the question is, right, why did the Tur leave that out? What happened, right? Well, he forgot. What happened? What, he was sleeping? What happened? So the answer is, he says, right, that the reason why he didn't put it there is because that is a subject of some, it has all kinds of details there, this halakha, regarding the knife. So because it's a little bit complicated, right, that's why he left it out, because it's not really like such a clear heter. It has all kinds of conditions involved. Okay, we'll see, right? It says we're going to see what those conditions are, so forth, so on. So then he goes on, ומה שיש לדקדק במה שפסק רב חסדא, הלכה כרבי יהודה, אכתוב בסמוך ובסימן תפקוד י"ד בסייעתא דשמיא. So he says, regarding that which we said, right, that the halachas agree with Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to discuss that later. He says, אבל אם נתעכם קצת ועדיין ראוי לצלות בו, אסור לתקנו, right? But then the Torah says something else. He says, but if the right skewer got a little bit bent, it happens, right? And these things get bent a little bit, bent out of shape. So he says that there, since it's still usable as is, right, you should not fix it. What do you care if it's a little bit bent, right? What, it's just aesthetics, what's the big deal? So therefore, just leave it as it is, and use it like as it is. That's what he's saying. Okay. So then he says, even if he was able to fix it, as we said, right in the Torah, with his bare hand, so it doesn't really require like professional kind of fixing, but nevertheless, right, not allowed to do it. So regarding that, it says Beit Yosef, Sham Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shemuel. It's brought down in the Gemara there, right? This halacha. Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, Shipud shenirtzaf asur letakeno b'yom tov. So he says, right, that a skewer that was broken, on the tip, right? The tip was broken there, whatever, right? You're not allowed to fix it on Yom Tov. Ve'afa bigav de pashit de mafshit le biyadeh. And even though, right, he can just straighten it out, by with his hands, he can do it. Not allowed to do so. Right? Right? So what are we talking about here, right? What was the problem with this skewer? So Rashi explains the problem was that it got bent out of shape, whatever, right? It got, smashed, whatever, right? So it's a little bit curved now, whatever. But nevertheless, right? You're not allowed to fix it, as we said, because you can use it as is, So why should you now go out of your way to fix this thing? Bend it back into shape. You know what I mean? What do you need that for? Use it as it is. That's the reason why. Right? So he says, right, that it got bent, but not really broken. It's not really broken, just bent out of shape. So he says you're not allowed to fix this on Yom Tov, as we said. Right? Rashi says same thing, right? You can use it as it is. But so therefore it's an exertion which is unnecessary. So therefore you're not allowed to do it. That's what he's saying, right? Okay, good. And even if he's doing it, just with his bare hands, as we said, right? Yeah, what's the big deal, right? I'll just like bend it into shape, take my hand. I'm a strong guy, right? I work out in the gym, I got strong arms, right? So I'll just bend it back into shape. What's the problem? So no, not allowed, right? Because you don't need it. So I don't need like, some kind of tools for this, right? So you don't really need to like, use a hammer, right? Whatever it's, whatever. וגם הראש כתב, אסור לתקנו ביום טוב. Rosh says, right, you're not allowed to fix it on Yom Tov. אף אגב דפשית לבידי, even though you can do it with your hands, as we said, right? You can fix it with your hands. כי יכול לצלות ולא תיקון, because the same thing Rosh says, right? You can roast with it as is, without fixing it. So what's the problem? Why fix it? For what? Okay. ולפי דבריהם, היינו דאיכא בין נרצם לנרצף, right? So it says, according to their words, this is the difference between something which is broken, chipped, or something which is bent out of shape, right? דנרצם היינו שנשבר ראשו, משום הכי ישרה דלא הווה חזר להשתמש בנרצף, היינו נעקם ממט שיכול להשתמש בו, ולא תיקון, לפיכך אסור תקנו. So it tells you, as we said, right, that's the difference between something which is broken or chipped, whatever, or bent out of shape. If it's broken, you can fix it because it's not usable as is. But if it's bent out of shape, you can use it as is, so don't fix it, right? That's the difference. Okay, good. So if you're going to ask me, how does Rabbi Yehuda allow this, right? When it's broken, so right, but it says there in a different place in the Gemara there that you're not allowed to fix the skewer, and you're not allowed to sharpen it either. It needs to be sharpened, right? It got dulled out, So it says, Tiratz Rashi. Rashi explains that question. Right? It says that opinion is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Enami ben Yitzam erev Yom Tov. Also, it says I can tell you that could be another answer, which is that it got broken before Yom Tov. But Divrei Kol, right? So therefore, everybody agrees you should have fixed it before. Or Shema Tikkun Dehatam Hainu Tikkun Gamur. Or it could be also, he says that when we're talking about fixing it over there, we're talking about fixing it Achenase Kli Mechamato, like really fixing it up, in like a very thorough manner until it becomes a utensil. Kal Katav Ran, that's what the Ran says. Katav Shioter Nachon Benav Mashe Piresh Haraz. So he says, but it's more correct what the Raz explained. Shenirtzaf hainu shenichpaf legamre. So he says the word nirtzaf, according to that opinion, is not talking about that it got broken, but it got like totally bent out of shape. Mishum hachi asur takno. Therefore, you're not allowed to, right, fix it as we said. Afagav de mafshit bideh mishum de shvuye manaru. So he says, even if you're just doing it with your hands, you're not allowed to do it. Why? Because you're making a new kli, right? Like that, when you bend it back into shape. Velo dame lenirtzam deleel, and it's not the same thing as nirtzam. So he says that's different. Why? Because there we're talking about it got a little bit bent out of shape, and here we're talking about it's like bent out of shape a lot. So that's the opposite of the language of tzoren. Bills no, right? Mishum hachi shared the love shivui manahu. So he says that is not really making like a kli, because it's just a little bit bent out of shape, not really big time. So you didn't make a kli; it was the same kli before, just you straightened it out. It was usable as it was. That's not called making a kli. Okay, good. Nice. Okay, good. So yeah, let's go on. Rabbi Yerucham katav b'chelek aleph. It says Rabbi Yerucham, שיפוט שנרצם, כלומר שנפגם פיו, ואין יכול לצלות בו, מותר לתקנו ביום טוב, ודווקא כשנרצם ביום טוב, והלכה, right? So he says, Rabbi Yerucham, something important, right, to understand. When do we allow to fix it? When it got broken on Yom Tov itself, right? As we said. Why is that? Because if it got broken before, you should have fixed it before, as we said, right? Whatever you can do beforehand, you should do beforehand. And that's the reason why. Okay. Look what he says, right? He says, this is the halacha, but he says, you know what? Don't teach it to the public. You know this halacha, right? Don't teach it to the public. Right? Because why? Maybe he'll come to fix it when it happened on Yom Tov, right? And that is not allowed. So this is the reason why we shouldn't teach this in public, right? This halacha. But it says if it got bent and you're able to use it as is, right? With a little bit of difficulty, then you're not allowed to fix it on Yom Tov. Even if it got bent out of shape like this on Yom Tov. Even if he could do it with his hands, right? So basically, it's the same thing as we saw before, right? Nothing really very different over here. Just some vivid description, perhaps, right? That's about it. But otherwise, right? It's all the same. It's all the same idea. Okay, very good, right? So I want to tell you guys, right? This is an important concept in halacha. I want to make you ladies wise, right? Since you're wise ladies, you come to this class, right? So you're looking for wisdom. You're seeking wisdom. So right, we have to give you all the wisdom we can. So right, what is the wisdom that I want to tell you here? That there are certain things we say in the Talmud, right? Also in the halacha, in the poskim. Halacha velo morim ken, right? Berabim, right? What does that mean? It's halacha, but we don't teach this in public, right? So let's explain, right, what that concept means. That it is the halacha. It's allowed to do this thing, but the problem is, if we teach it in public, it'll come to some mishaps, it'll bring people to do some mishaps, to do something which is forbidden. And this is what we're worried about, So therefore, things like this, the rabbi said, you know what? Yeah, it's halakha, but don't teach this in public. People are going to get the wrong impression from this. Okay? That's the idea. So that's what we're talking about here as well. He said, according to this rabbi, right? He says, don't teach this halakha in public. Why is that again, right? What's the reason why? Because if you tell them to do it when it got broken on Yom Tov, they'll do it also when it got broken before Yom Tov. They'll come to do, right, something even worse. So therefore, right, he says you shouldn't tell them this. By the way, it could be that not everybody agrees with this, what he's saying over here. But there is a concept like this, There are certain halachot that are halachot, but we don't teach it in public. Yeah. And this is, according to this rabbi, this is one of them. But there are others, which are even more dangerous. After, if you know me, and you've spoken to me about certain things in halakha, you know that, maybe you've heard some things from me like this, that there are certain things which are halakha, but we don't teach this in the public, because as we said, right, it can bring you to all kinds of issues. Here's the thing, right? There's two different levels of this though, So I'll explain to you what the levels are, okay? There is one level which is halakha velo morim ken berabim, right? What does that mean? Like what he said over here. It's halakha, but in public we don't teach it. So what does that mean? If we're giving like a lecture, in public, right? Facebook, whatever, right? YouTube, whatever, right? So there, right, we don't, it's a public lecture. So if you teach this kind of thing, people are going to get the wrong idea, right? That's, so we're not supposed to teach this in public, certain things like that. Because what happens is that when you teach it in public, somebody will get the wrong idea, and take it somewhere where it's not supposed to go. So there are things like that, not everything, but here and there, right? You find things like this, once in a blue moon, you find something like that. There's another level, which is halacha velo morin ken, right? What does that mean? Same thing, but here what we're saying is that we don't teach this at all. In other words, not in public and not in private. So what does that mean? According to the first definition, we won't teach it in public, but in private, if somebody comes and asks me, I'll tell them, right? It's allowed. So it's better in private. Why? Because in private, I can control, the situation and tell him, yeah, but like don't come to make this mistake. You know what I mean? Don't go too far with this. You gotta, that's so in private I can tell him to do it because I have more control, and I can tell him exactly what he needs to do, so he shouldn't make a mistake. But there are certain things where, even in private you can't tell people to do these kinds of things, even though it is the halakha. And why is that? Because these things are very dangerous. So things like that, right? They're pretty rare, these kinds of things. I mean, this is not a very common thing. But there are certain things, which we don't teach at all. So what does that mean? We don't teach it at all. So then, what is halacha for? Like, who is it for? What, for the mice? Who did Hashem make this for? What I mean? What does that mean, right? So what's the practical difference that it's halacha? So the practical difference is that the ones who know how to learn themselves, they're like learners, right? Torah scholars, rabbis, chachamim, and so people like this will learn it by themselves and understand it by themselves, so they'll know what to do and they won't come to error, right? Regarding this, because they're expert, they're wise. So people like that will not make mistakes like that. I mean, they know what they're doing. They know what the parameters are. They know what the limitations are, right? But some people who are not really very learned, right? And they don't know the ins and outs of halakha. They're not so good with these things. So people like that, right? Even if you teach them in private, sometimes these kinds of things, they'll do the wrong thing. They'll come to do something worse because they don't know what they're doing. So if you know how to do it yourself, if you're that smart, if you're that wise, you can open up the book and see yourself. Oh, okay, so then fine, no problem. We got no problem with that, right? If you're that smart, you won't make a mistake. But if you don't know how to learn by yourself, right? You rely on, you have a rabbi, whatever, right? You don't know, you can't do it yourself. So then we don't tell you because if you're not that smart, you're gonna make a mistake. You're gonna come to error. And so there are certain things like this, in halakha. So it's good to know, right? This concept, because people sometimes they think, well, yeah, well, like I heard it's halakha, but like it doesn't say that anywhere. Like nobody said this. Like no rabbi told me. Every rabbi I ask, he tells me it's not allowed. You know what I mean? But in the book that I saw, it says it's allowed. So how is that? So the reason is because of this thing, that sometimes we don't tell people that it's allowed. You know, and sometimes, by the way, a lot of these rabbis, who don't know how to learn so good halakha, they're not so expert. They themselves don't know how to figure it out themselves. So they think it's not allowed. Some of these rabbis, who are not so expert in halakha, they think it's not allowed. And this is the reason why a lot of things, where rabbis who are not so expert, they'll tell people it's not allowed to do this. But if you go to like a bigger rabbi, so the bigger rabbi will tell you it's allowed. You know, so what's the difference? The small rabbi doesn't know the halakha so good, so he can't tell you what really is allowed. He himself doesn't know how to learn properly. So this is the reason sometimes, that rabbis differ, in terms of what they teach people, because they themselves are limited in what they, or what they're able to figure out. That's the thing. Okay, so it's a whole discussion, right, in itself. But I just want to, clarify that, right? It's a good thing to know this concept. Okay, so let's get back to our discussion, right? ומה שכתב דהווה הלכה ואין מורין כן יראה דהיינו מפני שהוא מדמה אותו להשחזת סכין, דאמינן בה שהיא הלכה ואין מורין כמו שהתברר בסמוך, right? So Bet Yosef here comes and says, you know what? I agree with him. In other words, he corroborates his words more or less, right? We'll see in the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, if he says that, the Shulchan Aruch. But here in the Bet Yosef, he corroborates that, and he says there's a good reason why this rabbi said so, that we shouldn't teach this in public, because as we said, right, it can bring you to a mishap. So, kind of like he supports that, the Bet Yosef. Okay, so we'll see, right? In the Shulchan Aruch, what he says about that. So then, right, it says here in the Rambam, Rambam katav pek dalet שיפוט שנרצף על פי שהוא יכול לפשטו בידו. So it says Rambam like this, right? If you have, as we said, right, a skewer that got right just bent, a little bit, right? So even though he says the Rambam that he can bend it back, into shape with his hand, and metakninan oto. So he says we don't fix that on Yom Tov, right? Because the reason, what we said, the reason because you can use it as is, right? So we don't fix it. ולא הזכיר דין שיפוט שנרצם נראה דבריו. So he says, but you know what? It says Bet Yosef, the Rambam didn't mention the law of the skewer that got broken, though, right? He mentioned the one that got bent out of shape, but the broken one he didn't mention. Oh, why is that? ונראה מדבריו שהוא מפרש דבריו היינו שנתעקם מעט והוא יכול לתקנו בידו ונרצם ונתעקם שנרבה לפיכך כתב שאפילו נתעקם קצת אסור לתקנו וכל שכן אם נתקלקל הרבה דאסור שהוא סובר שאין הלכה כרבי יהודה ושאר המכשירים שאי אפשר לעשותן מערב יום טוב. Right, so the Bet Yosef, right, explains why did the Rambam didn't mention that, the case of the broken one. So he says it must be, right, that the Rambam holds that when the Gemara said that word, which implies that it's broken, the Rambam understands it differently, right? He understands it that it's like bent out of shape, like way bent out of shape, as we already said, like in the name of one of the rabbis, right? It's way bent out. So he says the reason why I didn't mention that is because since we said it's not allowed to fix it, even if it's a little bent, all the more so, right? You're not allowed to fix it when it's way bent out of shape. So that's what the Bet Yosef says, right? The reason why the Rambam didn't mention this halacha. Okay, interesting. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch, and I guess we can stop there. Yeah, so this we gotta pull it up, right? Gotta pull it up. we jumped over to a new chapter, right? We jumped ahead. So just see which chapter we're in here. Oh, here we go. Tav Kuf Tet. Okay. Tav Kuf Tet. Okay. Yeah. So said Shulchan Aruch like this. Shipud אף על פי שהוא יכול לפשטו בידו, right? So it's out. So as we said, right, the skewer got bent out of shape. Um, so even though, right, you're allowed to, I'm sorry, not allowed, even though he's able to bend it back into shape with his hand, and metakaninoto, we cannot fix it, right? So again, right, to reiterate, what's the reason why? Because you can use it as is, so there's no reason to fix it. So we don't allow you to fix that on Yom Tov. So right, if you remember, we made here a right, we categorized these kinds of labors, to say, right, they're machshirei ochel nefesh. What does that mean? These are preliminary labors that bring you to consumption. So we're a little bit more stringent with them than the labors of consumption themselves, like cooking, for instance, right? Baking. We're more lenient with that. But here, these are preliminaries. So because of that, we're stringent, and we say, right, if you're able to use it as is, don't fix it. That's the Shulchan Aruch. So says the Ramah here, but right? So the Ramah says, right, that's only when you can use it as is, right, without fixing it. Then it's not allowed. אבל אם אינו יכול לצלות בו בכך נשבר ביום טוב, מותר לתקנו. So, but it says if you're not able to use it at all, it's not usable, like in the case where it got broken, right, whatever. So then, right, we're allowed to fix it. And that's exactly what we learned. If it's not usable, yeah, for sure. Okay, so he says, right, mutar letakno, ve'en morin kin berabim. Like, so what does Rama say, right? Oh, Just like we saw in the Bet Yosef, right? That what? That even though this is the halacha, but we don't teach this in public, this halacha. You know? We don't tell people, right, in a lecture, Yeah, you can fix that skewer, whatever, right? They got broken. As we said, because if we tell them that this is allowed, what's the problem? The problem is they'll fix it even if it got broken before Yom Tov, which is not allowed. One thing will lead to another. So then he says, Rama continues, right? Exactly what I just told you, right? So he says this applies as a general rule to all the preliminary labors, right? That are, as we said, right? The preliminaries. That what? That if you were not able to fix it on Yom Tov, before Yom Tov, I'm sorry, you can fix it on Yom Tov. This is the rule, So it applies to anything like this. It doesn't really matter what it is, it's all the same. So what does that mean? We're talking about, again, right, preliminary labors that lead you to consumption. Those are the things that we're talking about here. Okay, very good. We're done. I guess we'll stop there. But Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. And Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov. Have a great Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. And so Bezat Hashem, we'll see you on Sunday. God willing, right? All right, Bezat Hashem. So fantastic. Nice to see you. And next week is Yom Yerushalayim, right? Which is the day that we conquered Jerusalem. We got it back into our hands. Can you imagine? After 2,000 years, we finally got back Jerusalem into our hands. Incredible. It's an incredible miracle, So it's like considered to be like a sort of a holiday because of that. Right? We conquered Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, and also the Kotel, right, the Wailing Wall. It all came into our hands that day. It was an incredible miracle, So, Bezat Hashem, we should have more miracles. Bezat Hashem, we'll see more good things, right? As we're seeing Baruch Hashem, it's a good sign, The more Nazis are being killed over there in Gaza, right? They're doing a pretty good job there, even though they slowed down a little bit. But it's okay, Bezat Hashem, Bezat Hashem. God willing, everything will be good. So, Bezat Hashem, we'll see you next week. God bless. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Laila
Kabbalah
Tov.
Tov. Thank you so much.
God bless.
Shabbat shalom.
Baruch.